Well, we're back doing Linux distribution reviews, and this is LinuxFX, a Windows clone based on Linux, and we're going to be taking a look at it right now on Linux Lounge. Indeed, this is LinuxFX, or Windows FX. I can't actually quite tell what it's called because in different places it seems to be called a different thing, which maybe they need to work on their naming a little bit because that's fairly confusing. But as you can see, it's a Windows clone and it does indeed look very much like Windows. Now, it's based on Ubuntu and uses the Cinnamon desktop. As you can see, it's quite clearly Cinnamon from the start menu. But other than that, it looks impressively like Windows 10, but more on that later. The first thing you get when you boot the system up is a little language selection screen, which this distribution, by the look of things, isn't primarily for a English-speaking audience, as the language on their homepage is not English. However, you can very much easily get the ISO, and as you can see, you can set it to English here. We'll go ahead and click OK, and as you can see, this is the live environment, so let's go ahead and get this installed. And one thing that I found to be a bit strange is that Windows FX or LinuxFX uses the Calamares installer, which is a little bit bizarre for an Ubuntu-based distribution. However, in theory, it should work just fine. Also, there's notably Windows logos all over the place, which I'm sure is something that Microsoft's legal team would be thrilled about if they saw this distribution. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get this installed, and I will be back in a minute. Also, while it's just installing, I want to talk about actually how cool the sort of installer thing seems to be, or like all the stuff it kind of shows you, I guess. Like, I'm not sure what all the facial recognition stuff is about. It's kind of bizarre, to be honest. But as you can see, they're open source, or so they say. And apparently you can actually get Windows FX on the Raspberry Pi, which that might be something that we should have a look at some point. But yeah, it's a bizarre little installer, but whatever they're sort of showing off looks kind of neat. And here we are back with Linux FX. Now, given the sort of size of this distribution, it's actually very impressive how quickly it installed. However, I did sort of install this on an SSD, so I would kind of expect it to be quite quick. Now, as I said earlier, this distribution looks very much like Windows 10. Pretty much everything is themed and it's really very convincing. In fact, I think if I was out in the wild and looked over someone's shoulder while they were using this, I wouldn't know that it wasn't Windows 10. You could probably even put this on someone's computer if they're less tech literate, and they'd probably barely notice the difference between this and Windows 10. Also, if you were curious, you also get the dark version of that Windows 10 wallpaper, which is pretty nifty. But yeah, as I say, this very much does look like Windows 10. I think the biggest giveaway is probably the start menu, but even then, that's very Windows-esque. You also have some like widgets down here, which is not very Windows 10-esque, but they are quite useful to have. Or rather, I mean the weather and the system one is not very Windows 10-esque. The rest looks very much like Windows 10. You also get your little task switcher like you would have with Windows 10. In fact, they even have their own little Cortana thing. Now, this runs at startup and sort of helps you with updates and drivers, which is kind of nice, but it might be confusing to some people coming over from Windows 10 as it doesn't do the same things as Cortana, but it's here, I guess. It could be kind of useful to new users. I actually can't figure out how to close it though. Yeah, that's fine. There we go. Now, the biggest caveat to this distribution I find is that it's very bloated. The ISO size is over 3 GB, and as we go through the applications you'll see why. It's very bloated. So if we just go ahead and open up the start menu, we can see that we have a lot of different categories of stuff. So starting up at accessories, you get an archive manager, you get backups, and for some reason you get Etcher, which I think it would have probably have been far more useful to include GNOME disks, which it doesn't. So that's kind of bloat in my opinion. If we keep going through, you know, you've got all your usual accessories and stuff. This distribution also comes with Wine, which I think is a little bit questionable. Like, I know it's supposed to be a Windows lookalike and stuff, but I think to a new user coming over, it's probably easier to get people used to the Linux way of doing things with a software center, as opposed to telling them to go out and download all their Windows programs that probably aren't going to work. But as you can see, we do have like quite a standard software center, so that will work. Also, we're using a 64-bit Wine prefix, which I guess makes sense as a default. You also get the Midnight Commander editor. That's a very bizarre thing to include for a distribution targeted at new users. You get Plank, which is kind of a dark type thing, which is also a very bizarre thing to include, but alright. If we keep going through, we get, you know, the usual screenshot tool, the text editor. Actually, I think you get two text editors. Yes, you do. You get the GNOME one and Mousepad, which, alright. If we keep going through, you get LibreOffice Math. You get Steam, which I'm not really sure how many people are going to be needing that, but alright, it's there. In your graphics, you get a document scanner, a document viewer, you get the GNU image manipulation program, you get an image viewer, you get ImageMagick, you get Inkscape, and you get LibreOffice Draw. Now, I think that's quite unnecessary. I'm not actually sure how I feel about distributions including the GNU image manipulation program, but most of them seem to, and it's fine. But including Inkscape as well, I genuinely don't know how many people are going to need that. And in your internet, you get Firefox, Chrome, Teams, Skype, Steam, and Transmission. Now, Transmission and Firefox, fine. Teams and Skype, I genuinely do not know how many people are going to need that, and I would probably err on the side of not including those sorts of things. And Chrome, I generally think that it's not a good idea to bundle a distribution with proprietary software, but instead let people choose whether or not they want it themselves. And I think a better choice would have probably been to just bundle Chromium, because, you know, free and open source software. But what definitely didn't need to happen is having Chrome and Firefox. It just contributes to the bloat of the distribution a lot. So if we're going to continue along, you get a document view, you get Evolution Email, you get the full LibreOffice suite. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a good choice. In your sound video, you get Kodi, Simple Screen Recorder, and VLC. The only complaint I would have there is Kodi. How many people really need that? I don't know. And in your administration, you get Gparted, File Manager Actions Configuration Tool, HTOP, Midnight Commander, the usual stuff. There's nothing in there that I really have a problem with. I just think Midnight Commander is a bit of a weird thing to include. And in your preferences, you get all the usual sort of stuff. One thing I do want to quickly show, though, is if we go into themes, you actually do get a dark version of this theme. If we go into LinuxFX dark, and as you can see, you can sort of have your own little Windows 10 dark mode, which is quite handy. So all in all, I think this distribution very much does look like Windows 10, and if you like the look of Windows 10, I would probably recommend this. But I do think that Windows clones, like sort of as a distribution genre, I guess you could say, in Linux are a little bit unnecessary. And that's just kind of my take on things. Because no matter how hard you try, I don't think you will ever actually get Linux to work like Windows in the way that counts. Like, for instance, if you put this in front of a new user and they tried to use it as they would use Windows, they would have serious problems. It just wouldn't work properly. And I think a better approach is sort of like what the Linux Mint team and other distributions like that are doing. They're making something that's easy and, you know, easy to learn for new users, and that doesn't necessarily look like Windows, but it, you know, it works very well. But that's just sort of my take, and I think if I was introducing a new user to Linux, I would probably rather put something tried and tested like Linux Mint in front of them, as opposed to something like this. But that's just kind of my take on things. If you want to use a distribution like this, go right ahead. That is what open source software is for, doing whatever you want with it. And if you do want to try this out, I will have a link to it in the video description, but I think that's pretty much all I have to say about LinuxFX. There's nothing, massively wrong with it, but I do find it's like a tad bit unnecessary and a little bit bloated in parts, but that's fine. That's the sort of the things you can do with Linux. But I think that's pretty much it for today's video. I thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, consider liking, commenting and subscribing on this video. Also, I have a link in the description, and that's to my LBRY channel, which is a open source alternative to YouTube. You should absolutely check out. If you're already over on LBRY, consider leaving a tip on this video, as it really helps the show out. And I think that's pretty much it for today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.